The haunting recurrences of my childhood, spanning perhaps 3 or 4 years, still cast a long shadow over my understanding of reality. I can't pinpoint the exact beginning, but around early elementary school, a recurring, half-lucid nightmare began to plague me. It wasn't a nightly terror, thankfully, but a chilling visitation every couple of months, always the same, always leaving me with a profound sense of dread. Each episode started in a disorienting, out-of-body perspective. I would be lying in my bed, but my vision wasn't my own. Instead, I was looking down, as if from the ceiling, observing my bedroom as though through a security camera feed. This detached view of myself, of my own sleeping form, was unsettling, a strange dissociation that immediately triggered a primal fear. I tried to move, to float down to my body, to shake myself awake, but my ethereal form was utterly unresponsive. All I could manage was to swivel my head, a desperate attempt to survey the room, to find an anchor in this strange, spectral existence. The half-lucidity was a torment in itself. I knew it was a dream, a construct of my sleeping mind, yet that knowledge did little to quell the rising tide of panic. My heart would pound against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the eerie silence of the dream. After several agonizing moments of trying to calm my racing thoughts, my attention would inevitably be drawn to the peculiar anomalies scattered throughout my room. The first and most consistent detail was the digital clock on my nightstand. Its glowing red numbers, instead of advancing, would always be counting backward, a relentless descent into an unknown past. This subtle, impossible reversal was always the initial crack in the facade of a normal dream, a signal that the nightmare was truly beginning. Once that impossible detail registered, my perception would sharpen, and I'd begin to notice other unsettling oddities. Taped to random spots on the walls and dresser were strange drawings. They were childlike, rendered in crayon, depicting scenes one might expect from a kid my age. But the chilling truth was, I had no memory of ever creating them. I wasn't the kind of kid who spent hours sketching. Art wasn't my forte. So, the idea that I had simply forgotten drawing them was ludicrous. They consistently depicted the same unnerving image. A row of faceless people, hands clasped, all seemingly smiling, with one significantly smaller figure, who I instinctively knew was me, nestled amongst them. They always stood in front of a house with a distinct blue roof. The details beyond that remained frustratingly vague, a hazy memory that refused to fully solidify. The other recurring element that haunted me long after waking was an old toy train. Not just any toy train, but a specific wooden model I had cherished and then mysteriously lost years prior. In the dream, it would always be sitting in a different, arbitrary spot on my bedroom floor, a misplaced relic of a forgotten past. Its presence, a tangible connection to a lost object, deepened the unsettling mystery of the dream. After I had spent what felt like an eternity analyzing these bizarre details in my dream room, a new, inexplicable urge would wash over me. It was a primal, almost magnetic pull towards my bedroom window. Despite the growing unease, I found myself compelled to glance towards it. And as if on cue, a figure would materialize just inches from the glass. A sudden, horrifying apparition in the otherwise familiar night. It was a man. His hair was short and gray, prematurely aged, and he bore a distinct, jagged cut on his left temple. That singular detail was all I could ever truly recall of his face. The rest remained a blur, indistinct and terrifying. For a few agonizing seconds, he would simply watch me sleep, his eyes, though undefined in my memory, conveying an unnerving intensity. Then, his hand would rise, fingers splayed, and he would begin to claw at the window pane, a grotesque, silent attempt to pry it open from the outside. The scraping sound, though unheard in the dream, was visceral, a chilling echo that resonated deep within my subconscious. That's usually when I would jolt awake, my heart hammering against my ribs, my body slick with a cold sweat. Sometimes I would immediately scramble out of bed, driven by an irrational need to confirm what I had seen, to check the window for signs of his presence. Other times, the terror was so profound that I would be paralyzed, unable to move a muscle, trapped in the lingering shadow of the nightmare. But regardless of my initial reaction, the compulsion to verify was always overwhelming. I dragged myself to the window, peering out into the inky blackness of the night, my mind desperately searching for any evidence of his visit, claw marks on the glass, a smudge from where his spectral hand had pressed, a faint footprint in the dew-kissed grass below. But there was never anything. No sign of disturbance, no trace of the man with the gray hair and the scarred temple. It was as if he had been a phantom, a figment of my terrified imagination. After the fourth such occurrence, the recurring nature of the dream became undeniable, too persistent to ignore. The fear, though contained to my subconscious, was bleeding into my waking hours. I finally confessed to my parents. My mom, ever the pragmatist, offered a gentle reassurance, explaining that recurring dreams weren't uncommon for children my age, a natural part of growing up and processing new experiences. My dad, always the protector, chimed in, reminding me that they were always just one room away, a comforting presence if I ever felt scared. I nodded, feigning reassurance, hoping their words would somehow alleviate the persistent dread. But they didn't. Not really. My dad, with his innate ability to read my unsaid fears, sensed my lingering unease. He took my hand, his grip firm and grounding, and together we embarked on a nighttime exploration of our house's exterior. We circled the foundation, peering into the shadows, checking every window, every potential hiding spot. He pointed out the undisturbed flower beds, the untrodden patch of grass beneath my bedroom window, the impeccable cleanliness of the glass itself. There was no indication that anyone had been there, no telltale footprints, no smudges on the sill, nothing to validate the horrifying images that plagued my sleep. Even so, despite the tangible evidence of absence, his diligent search didn't calm my nerves as much as he might have hoped. Keep in mind, this was roughly a year into the dreams, meaning they were occurring approximately once every 3 months. It wasn't a nightly haunting, not even close, but the exact same sequence of events for times over definitely signified something more than just a random nightmare. Even at that young age, a part of me instinctively knew this was significant, a pattern too precise to be mere coincidence. But then, as abruptly as they had begun, the dreams stopped. For a while at least. I went nearly 6 months without a single episode, a period of blissful normalcy that allowed me to gradually shed the lingering fear. At some point, I even allowed myself to believe it was over, that the strange, unsettling dreams had simply faded into the background, much like other irrational childhood fears tend to do when life resumes its ordinary rhythm. I stopped checking the window at night, the vivid image of the man receding into the deeper corners of my memory. But then it came back. Without warning, without any discernible trigger, one random night I found myself back in that familiar, terrifying dreamscape. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The retro-counting clock, the enigmatic drawings, the misplaced toy train, every detail precisely replicated. Yet, a deeper, more profound sense of dread permeated this particular recurrence. It was a fear that clawed at my subconscious with twice the intensity of the earlier episodes. I couldn't immediately pinpoint what was different, what was amplifying the terror. Every element seemed to be following the exact same chain of events, the familiar script of my nightmare. But as my disembodied gaze swept across the room, it finally registered. The difference was chillingly simple, yet utterly horrifying. My bedroom window was open. Not just a crack, but fully ajar, inviting the cold night air and the unseen presence from beyond. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a cold, sharp shock that instantly ripped me from the clutches of sleep. I jolted awake, my heart hammering, my body rigid with a terror unlike anything I had ever experienced. For a torturous period of what felt like 5 minutes, I was utterly, irrevocably paralyzed. My body refused to obey, clamped down by the terrifying grip of sleep paralysis. It wasn't a passive paralysis. My brain was screaming at me, a frantic internal siren urging me to move, to check the window, to confirm the horror of my dream. But my limbs remained stubbornly unresponsive, heavy as lead, no matter how desperately I strained. On top of this agonizing immobility, an intense, unnatural cold permeated the room, a chilling draft that felt as if it were blowing directly through my wide-open bedroom window, a fact I was absolutely convinced of. Those 5 minutes stretched into an eternity of pure, unadulterated terror. My mind fixated on a single horrifying thought. The man from my dreams, the one with the gray hair and the scarred temple, was just moments away from climbing through that open window. He was coming for me, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, I could do to stop him. The helplessness was a crushing weight, amplifying the fear to an almost unbearable degree. When finally the sleep paralysis released its suffocating hold, and control of my limbs surged back, I wasted no time. Every fiber of my being propelled me towards the window, a desperate need for confirmation overriding all lingering terror. My hands, trembling, reached for the lock, and with a click, I confirmed it. The window was securely shut, locked tight. The cold draft must have been a trick of my mind, a phantom sensation conjured by fear. Despite the relief, sleep remained an impossible feat that night. The chilling clarity of the false awakening, the visceral terror of believing the window was open, had shattered any chance of rest. The following morning, I moved through my routine in a daze, fueled by adrenaline and a profound sense of exhaustion. How I managed to function to feign normalcy remains a mystery to me even now. Another couple of months passed, a period of heightened vigilance. I wasn't going to be fooled again. Every night before I succumbed to sleep, I would consciously re-engage with the dream, replaying its terrifying sequence in my mind, attempting to brace myself for its inevitable return. My logic was simple, if perhaps flawed. By keeping the dream at the forefront of my thoughts, I hoped to desensitize myself, to mitigate the fear should I experience it again. And to my surprise, this unusual technique actually worked. The next time the dream visited, its grip on me was significantly weakened. The crushing terror had receded, replaced by a duller, more manageable unease. I was barely half as scared as I had been during previous episodes. Upon waking, I didn't even bother to check the window, a testament to my newfound detachment. By the time it recurred again, my fear had dwindled to almost nothing. It was still unsettling, yes, a strange, persistent whisper in the back of my mind, but no longer a source of genuine terror. Yet, something about its persistent nature, its refusal to truly vanish, lingered. It wasn't scary, not in the same visceral way, but it was enough to make me feel compelled to bring it up to my parents again. Perhaps it was the passage of time, the subtle maturation in my voice, or the careful, detailed way I chose to articulate the recurring sequence of events, something I hadn't done before. But for whatever reason this time they paid closer attention. I recounted every detail, from the disorienting out-of-body perspective to the reverse counting clock, the strange crayon drawings, the misplaced toy train, and finally the man at the window with his distinct gray hair and the cut on his left temple. As I reached the description of the man, specifically mentioning the cut on his forehead, my parents' demeanor subtly shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change, but enough for me to notice. A flicker of something passed between their eyes, an unspoken communication that immediately put me on edge. Before I could even finish my sentence, my dad cut me off, his voice unusually sharp. "Are you sure about the cut?" he asked, his gaze fixed intently on mine. I confirmed it, my voice firm. He then looked over at my mom, a silent exchange that spoke volumes, hinting at some shared, unspoken knowledge that I was clearly not privy to. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I asked them what was going on, but they offered only vague reassurances, murmuring that everything was fine, that there was nothing to worry about. Not wanting to upset them further, or perhaps afraid of what I might uncover, I didn't press the issue. But from that point on, a new seed of suspicion took root in my mind. There was more to this story, I was certain. The dreams, the man, my parents' strange reaction. It all felt connected, a puzzle with missing pieces. As it turned out, my intuition was correct. A few days after that unsettling conversation, my parents sat me down. There was no dramatic reveal, no theatrical confession. Just a quiet, somber moment where my mom, her voice gentle but firm, did most of the talking. "There's something we need to tell you," she began, her eyes searching mine for understanding. She explained that when I was very young, too young to form lasting memories, there was a man named Brian. They always referred to him as Uncle Brian, though he wasn't a blood relative, but a close friend of my dad's from college. He had been a significant presence in my early life, especially when both my parents were working full-time. He was around a lot, a constant, comforting figure during my baby and toddler years. But then something happened. My dad, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, his voice clipped. He didn't offer details, only stating that there had been a falling out between them, a rupture so severe that they had completely severed ties. He explicitly forbade Brian from ever coming near our family again, specifically from coming near me. That was the end of it, he concluded, his jaw tight. 1,000 questions swirled in my mind, but when I pressed for details about what had caused the fallout, they remained tight-lipped. They simply repeated that it had nothing to do with me, that I didn't need to worry, attempting to shield me from a past they clearly found painful. The only other detail they offered, and it was this piece of information that truly sent a sickening jolt through me, was the physical description of Brian. My mom mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Brian had a noticeable scar on his forehead from a car accident he'd been in years before I was born. They didn't explicitly connect the dots, didn't verbalize the obvious link to the man in my dreams, but they didn't have to. I was old enough to make the connection myself, old enough for the chilling implications to sink in with terrifying clarity. The man with the gray hair and the cut on his left temple. Brian. The realization was a cold, bitter pill to swallow, shattering the illusion of the dreams being mere figments of my imagination. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me, a quiet presence in the fading lamplight. I could tell he wasn't entirely satisfied with how the earlier conversation had gone, as if there were more he needed to say, more he felt I deserved to know. After a few moments of weighty silence, he finally shared his theory. He believed the dreams were my subconscious mind's way of processing something deeply buried, a forgotten memory from when I was very little, before I could even form full sentences. He spoke of how close I had apparently been with Brian, describing a bond one had no conscious recollection of. He mentioned how I would cry when Brian left our house, how I always wanted him, specifically, to be the one to read me to sleep. "I can't think of any other way you'd know about that scar on his forehead," my dad said, his voice low, almost a whisper. The truth of his words resonated with an unnerving clarity. I had no memory of this Brian person whatsoever, no visual, no emotional connection. Even now, looking back, I still can't recall a single memory involving him. It was as if he had been erased from my conscious mind, yet somehow, his image, his distinguishing mark, had been imprinted on my subconscious. Despite the unsettling revelation, I had no choice but to move on with my life. The recurring dream, or what I now understood to be a fragmented, haunting memory, was a part of me, but it couldn't consume me. Another handful of months passed, a period I struggled to pinpoint precisely in my timeline, as the exact intervals between each dream remain elusive. However, one thing was clear: the frequency of the dreams undeniably decreased after that conversation with my parents. I had the nightmare only once, perhaps twice, over the course of the next year, a stark contrast to the earlier, more regular visitations. I began to hope, once again, that the dreams were finally fading, that the release of this hidden truth had somehow purged them from my mind. But then, sometime in year 4 of this ongoing ordeal, things took a very dark and terrifying turn. One night, after waking from the familiar sequence of the dream, a subtle, almost unconscious glance towards my window, a habit ingrained by years of fear, made my blood run cold. This time I actually saw something move. It was just a flicker, a fleeting shift in the inky blackness beyond the glass, but I was 100% certain. Something had just moved from right outside my bedroom window. In that instant, all the fear I had spent years trying to prevent, trying to desensitize myself to, came rushing back. But it wasn't just the old fear, it was something worse, a raw, primal terror amplified by the chilling realization that my nightmare might have been a premonition, a window into a horrifying reality. I scrambled out of bed, a desperate cry escaping my lips as I screamed for my parents. They responded immediately, their shouts of alarm echoing through the silent house. My dad, a blur of motion, sprinted outside in his bare feet, driven by a protective instinct stronger than any fear. My mom held me tightly, her arms a desperate shield against the unseen threat, her own body trembling. I could hear their hushed whispers when my dad returned, his voice low and strained. They told me to stay put, to remain in their room while they called the police. I obeyed, huddled under the covers, listening intently for the distant wail of sirens, for the reassuring voices of law enforcement. But I heard nothing beyond their frantic whispers. No sirens, no other voices. Just the muffled sounds of their frantic conversation. My dad, despite the obvious distress, insisted everything was fine, that the police were on their way and would take care of everything. He was trying to be strong for me, to project an image of control in the face of absolute chaos. The next day my dad confessed to me, his voice still heavy with concern. He had seen what he believed were extremely faint footprints underneath my bedroom window. The ground was still damp from recent rain, and the faint indentations, though almost imperceptible, had been enough to confirm his worst fears. I asked him if he thought it was Brian, a name that now carried a heavy weight of dread. He vehemently denied it, claiming it was impossible. He explained that they had moved since the falling out, and Brian didn't know our new address. He promised me, with a conviction that he rarely displayed, that nothing bad was ever going to happen again, that he would protect me. And remarkably, he turned out to be right. I never had that dream again. The visitations, the unsettling visions, the recurring terror, they ceased entirely. The nightmare, along with the chilling reality it had mirrored, simply vanished. My parents, to this day, are reluctant to discuss this incident. I can understand why. It's a dark chapter, a painful memory they prefer to keep buried. I've since stopped trying to pry answers from them, accepting that some truths are too unsettling to confront directly. But what I can't wrap my head around, what continues to haunt my waking thoughts, is the sickening realization that every single time I had that dream, every single night I saw that man at my window, there genuinely might have been someone out there watching me. Was it truly plausible that someone had been periodically stalking me for 4 years, meticulously timing their appearances to coincide with my subconscious fears? The idea defies logic, strains credulity. And I can't decide what's scarier. The possibility that it truly was Brian, the man from my childhood, returning to haunt me, or simply some complete stranger, a nameless, faceless entity that my brain, in its twisted logic, associated with him for some unknown reason. And how, precisely, did that external reality translate into the specific, recurring imagery of my dreams? I've delved into research, consulted articles on lucid dreaming and psychological phenomena, but I still can't find a plausible explanation for how such a literal, external event could manifest with such precise detail in my subconscious. Perhaps he was making a subtle noise, a faint rustle in the bushes, and my brain, already primed by the anxiety of the situation, picked up on it, weaving it into the fabric of my nightmares. I genuinely can't say for sure. But what I can say with a chilling certainty is that I am 95% sure my parents never actually called the police that night. The silence, the lack of sirens, the hurried whispers, it all points to a cover-up, a desperate attempt to protect me from a truth they deemed too frightening. That's a piece of this puzzle I will likely never get an explanation for. And without it, without complete closure, I'll likely never get all the answers regarding this deeply unsettling experience. But if I do, rest assured I'll provide an update. The unsettling thought of that lurking presence, mirroring the terror of my dreams, remains a chilling mystery.